I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Martyn Element. He's a Vancouver marketing and corporate advisor who focuses on sourcing and pursuing new business ventures and opportunities. Welcome back to the show, Martyn.
Welcome to you all, and as I always say, so exciting, welcome to you all with the media and the way that things work in the world in 2016 all over the world. Welcome to you all.
Lithium. We know we're going to need it for all of those Tesla cars they plan to crank out. How is the lithium market?
Resurgence of interest, led, of course, by the company that's done a tremendous amount for us all, Frank Justra's company, Lix. I haven't looked at Pure Lithium, but of course they were looking for things in Nevada and missed the targets and things. But no, the whole market in lithium is still very much there. But the same rules are still applying now more than ever of the what the awful titles they give some of these people, the snake oil salesman, or the penny dreadfuls, or whatever you want, awful things, vernaculars you want to put onto these types of stocks. There is a tremendous amount of lithium junior stocks out there, and they were bought for many different reasons or put together. And the buyer must be very, very aware that it must, and the homework and the diligence needs to be done on who is running these lithium deals and how much experience they had in that space. And if they don't have experience, who are they hiring to bring that experience into that space? Because that is where the game can fall down. It's been an old story, of course, because of the years and the attention of this particular marketplace with gold. There are a lot of junior gold deals, but a lot of them have had a lot of men, whether they be promoters or whether they be financiers, they at least have had a lot of exposure and experience, at least in that space. But with lithium, it's a very unknown to a great degree, and unstudied. And, lithium, up until not long ago, was the thing that was used for the medical purposes. I remember I worked with Gren Thomas not that number of years ago down in, I think it was North Carolina, looking for deposits on land down there, and the land package was assembled, and that was all properties that for when that particular part of America was one of the centers of the world for lithium, but the usage at that time was all relative to the medical aspect. So yes, lithium's having a resurgence, and no surprise to Martyn Element. I think we are witnessing a revolution, and I think it's going to it'll have its ebbs and tides, but I think they will be more constant perhaps than the marijuana, which obviously has also had its ebbs and tides, and we'll have another tide, I think, when the laws change in this country at the beginning of next year, which are being promised emphatically by the current government here, Liberal government. But, lithium, I think people will try and tell you that there's a substitute, and at this time there appears to be no for sure substitute. Yes, there's companies that are coming up with this and that, but lithium, and the other thing that's getting more and more play is cobalt, because there doesn't seem to be the abundance of cobalt, and that's interesting in its own ways. Yes, lithium is having a resurgence, and it'll have its ebbs and tides, but I think it'll just keep showing strength.
Something I've noticed on the charts when you watch the markets every day is when the Canadian equities fall, the venture exchange continues to climb.
You're right, Jim, and we haven't talked about that, listeners, but you see the red, or you watch the BNN, or you watch your news services, and you see all of them are down, and the old venture exchange pushes its nose up. Well, the venture exchange, listeners, I wasn't aware just a few hours ago. I read somewhere here, maybe I'm off, but I read that it's doubled in the last quarter, which is a heck of a number, by the way. And yes, the venture exchange is what it is. They say after the big boards are getting a little tired or close or toppy or frothy, that you see the mid-sized and the small companies starting to show some real strength. And this time is no different than it has been over the decades. And, but as I say about the lithium stocks, I just read Michael Ballinger, or Bollringer as I knew him when he was a successful broker in Toronto. He writes a wonderful letter, listeners. Over 70,000 people following on Twitter. Not that means he's good or bad, but it's a lot of people following him. He has just put out a very good letter, I think, and he goes on about, the promoters here in this town and the TSXV and be careful, and that is that never wears out from a warning. However, he does finish off his article in a very positive vein for a couple of paragraphs, talking about where do people think that these junior gold mining or whatever lithium mines come from in the first place. And that it really does seem not falling, well, it does, it falls on deaf ears. And I said during the darkest days of the TSXV that they should do more about giving publicity to the big mining companies to say, this is where it came from. This is our birthplace. Don't ever forget that. The Junior Exchange or the Vancouver Stock Exchange. And we're talking about the biggest mining companies in the world today. And that's what the big banks seem to want to ignore as well, and therefore the wealth management. They serve an obvious role, and that would be silly, completely silly of me, but they do seem to miss that point. And I think there is space for the juniors. But yes, the TSXV is healthy. And if you think that gold still has a lot more to run, and if you look back historically, it probably does, but never be afraid of taking your original investment off the table if that's what you've been doing, playing some of those juniors, and never be afraid. You never go broke taking a profit too soon. All the usual regular advice applies. So yes, the TSXV has been doing well. And, as much as gold and lithium, I said this before, and it didn't happen. It didn't come to be. So, mark that. I thought the copper was going to do some things. Time flies, unfortunately, but it was probably 8 or 9 months ago. And once again, I think I mentioned this the other day, that when I was in London, I heard a few whispers on copper, and I met a young fellow just this last 2 weeks who's written a book. My electrician drives a Porsche, and that's more about investing and the rise of the new spending classes in the world, and he's been getting great reviews and backings from some of the most powerful, successful people in the world that are running some of the biggest resource companies in the world, saying what a wonderful book it is. And his name is Gianni, Gianni Kovacevic. Speaks 5 or 6 languages, including Croatian, German, Spanish, English, and Italian, and a very, very well-spoken young man. And he is running a junior copper company that he has picked up he started in the pennies. It's now, I think, trading around 10 pennies. He's an example of what's happening, and I think there's an undercurrent going on copper. Copper, if you look at the graphs and everything else, it's equally as horrific in many ways as gold, perhaps not quite percentage-wise as horrific, but I think there could be some interesting scenarios. And of course, if you want to hedge your bets on that, if you can find a copper gold, as sometimes they do come together, that could be an interesting scenario. So, yeah, it's like a big garden, and a lot of things are blossoming and growing, and it's just a wonderful time to be in the business, and I'm hoping in every way it's going to keep going.
We'll have more with Martyn Element right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Martyn Element. Martyn, I know you're in love with a Tesla car. I enjoy being behind one when I'm in traffic because there's no exhaust, of course. They had another crash in China. Apparently, somebody in China thought the autopilot feature or auto drive meant that it would drive itself. It didn't. It crashed. It wasn't a fatality like the one in Florida. Do you think people are ready for cars to drive themselves?
No, I don't. But I think it is going to happen. And I think there will be these setbacks. And remembering, listeners, and I often talk in general terms, because that's, obviously there's people out there that make their living, a very good living on this business. But, there's an awful lot of, it is a negative, and the stock took a real blow, I'm sure, after that, temporarily. But, there's short merchants, and they make a fortune by shorting these stocks. And don't forget that either. So things get broadcast and blossomed, and yes, there will be setbacks on these electric cars and driverless cars. And I think, but the future is there. And I think my little boy, he's only little, he'll be 5 next week. I mean, so it means he'll be driving in how many years' time? 11 years' time. Yeah. He will be driving a driverless car that'll probably almost be able to drive on its own. And I think that there'll still be cars that aren't driverless, of course, for a long time. But yes, it'll be an interesting scenario, and yes, I do think it's the way of the future. And there will be setbacks, and there will, unfortunately, be more deaths. And as I read something just the other day about this subject, and it touched on a vein that I've touched on before, that if you think there will be a lot more less accidents, which there will in the long run, and things will be a lot more monitored, then the car insurance companies won't perhaps be the place to be in the future. But shorting is an interesting thing. I have a good dear friend of mine, one of my closest friends. His personally biggest investment, even though he's a resource man and has been for many, many, many years, including working for the infamous Rothschild family, and I actually went in the room on more than one occasion where they set the world's gold price, which was a fascinating experience, listeners, just 3 or 4 people sitting in a boardroom, and that's where the price was made. And they're talking about tampering with that, by the way, at the moment, another subject for another day. But his largest personal investment these days, listeners, is in the aquifer. And Martyn Element doesn't know very much about that. And anytime I hear that environmentalists are going to be against that particular company that he's investing in, I think, you've got the terrible, tremendous strength in those areas, and on and on and on and on. And then in the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 occasions to have in my own personal life examples of aquifer working, fabulously well. One was a good friend of mine last weekend that has rented a nice place down in Palm Springs. He's trying to break into the wine business in America with a wonderful wine, Foxtrot, which is, said to be one of the best Pinot Noirs in Canada, and I have no problem disbelieving that. But he's set it up, and he's down there pushing his wine into the States, and he said that he can't believe his water bill because he's on top of an aquifer, and it's run by the local First Nations. And rather than raping and pillaging on the price, they've made it a unbelievably low price. And I'm going to give you a number, listeners, and you're going to say, no, I say that isn't true. And I've asked him 2 or 3 times. He's an ex-engineer, and I respect him. He said, well, my electricity bill is as much as $600 a month. I said, well, I have no trouble disbelieving that with air conditioning and electricity costs. He said, my water costs are $12, and they've just gone up a little bit. And I said, what? He said $12. If he'd said to me $200 or $300 or more a month, I wouldn't have been shocked. And that's an aquifer that works really, really well down in that Palm Springs area. And that's an example of aquifers. Now, another chap that happens to be the largest shareholder of one of these up-and-coming gold companies that I am looking to become the advisor on, I very much hope I can get involved with, is in Arizona. And the man that owns the land that it's on, and it's an old, used to be an old producer. It's never been really had that much exposure, but has great possibilities that I'm looking at. But the man that owns it he owns 7 customized Rolls Royces, so he's obviously done very well financially. But his claim to fame is aquifers in that part of America. And I don't know the details, but they say he's a very nice man. His feet are on the ground. But it was just two quick examples of not all aquifers are environmentally unfriendly. I mean, aquifers, I don't know that much about them, and I'm going on too much about them, but the reason I brought it up is it's been a subject of tremendous shorting. And, by the big boys, and there's been accusations that it's been done in working with some of the big environmental groups. Big accusations, by the way, listeners, and I'm not naming the company on purpose. I don't want to get into that. But it's just interesting to see Aquifer, a guy that's made his living and his life has been involved in resources, now backing, as does Rick Rule. Rick Rule says water is going to be the thing of the future as well. So let's not lose sight of that, listeners. And I'm having lunch with a very successful, infamous gentleman, and we are trying very hard to get him to come on a broadcast. He doesn't do broadcasts. I am going to try and ask him to do something with us with the new platform that is coming with House Street. I'm seeing more evidence on it on my Facebook, and I'm seeing more evidence of a brand new imaging that we have done, the group that Jim and I work with. I think it's going to do very well. I think there's been tremendous strides in the social media and tremendous things are being done in that space. And Tom Allen, who runs the company that we're involved with, has taken his time putting all his together, but he's waited, I think, for the right time, and I think it could be one of the more interesting mediums in the future as we go ahead. That's it, Jim.
Well, Martyn, you're sounding a whole lot more healthy than you did when you just came back from England getting one of those horrible English colds.
Yep, I had the worst cold I've had in 10 years. And I think that is a lot to do with my cold press juicing, which listeners know I'm a big believer in, and I'm going to get right back on that program again. And the older you get, the more you got to look after yourself. And without your health, you have nothing. You can forget all the money, and you can die in the cemetery being the richest man in the cemetery, and that is no good to anybody, as we know. That's a negative, isn't it, Jim? Let's end on a positive note. We're in the middle of the summer here, listeners. It's about 75 for the Americans, which is 25 for us here in jolly old or somewhere around in Canada. And I look forward to reporting back in a couple of weeks' time, Jim.
Martyn, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
I love it. And happy summer to all of the listeners.
My guest has been Martyn Element, a Vancouver marketing and corporate advisor who focuses on sourcing and pursuing new business ventures. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward questions for the show to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.